Well, that's just prime.
Hello everyone, this is Chris and Ian, and this is That's Just Prime, a Beast Wars podcast. This is episode 3 for us, but today we're covering episode 4. I know that's a little bit confusing, but there'll be times where we'll do double episodes and stuff, so we need to be clear. This is our third podcast, but it's episode 4 of Beast Wars Equal Measures. How are you, Ian?
All good, thank you, mate. Nice to see you again. I had a good time reviewing the third episode, The Web, which you can find, of course, on all of our podcast channels that we've outlined, and we'll have links to descriptions all over the place. But yeah, we're here today to go through episode 4. So just want to say before we start, thank you very much to everyone for the kind words, for the feedback to reviewing episode 3, our second episode, our second podcast. It's been really cool getting some of the nice feedback, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's really positive too. We haven't had any naysayers or anything. It's been positive, constructive criticism where needed. Not much of it. So it's been pretty positive in general. So we're happy. But keep it coming. Definitely. Keep following us. Subscribe on whatever app you use, whether it be Apple Podcasts or Podbean or Spotify. It all helps us out. We know what's happening and where our listeners are coming from. Our schedule, as you would have seen, is fairly consistent now. At my time, because I'm in Australia, I'm releasing the episodes on a Saturday night, which is nice and early on a Saturday morning for those in the UK, and everyone in between. You can obviously work out those times. We're not going to go through everyone.
No.
For most of our listeners are between our two countries at the moment. So Saturday mornings for you guys in the UK, well, most of the time you'll be able to have a listen while you're at the gym or going for your walk in the morning, having your coffee. And for us Aussies down here, while you're having a beer or whatever on a Saturday night, you can have a listen too. So again, thanks everyone. We're loving the feedback and we're loving doing this. We're massive Beast Wars fans, if you hadn't figured out, doing a Beast Wars podcast. We're big Transformers fans. Obviously, we do our YouTube channels and photography and all that sort of stuff. But Beast Wars is our one true love, and that's what we're old, but we're not super old. That's what we grew up on, Ian and I. So anyway, today's episode is, like I said, episode 4, Equal Measures. So Ian, do you want to take us in today? Let's get straight into it.
Let's go into it, shall we? So yeah, coming fresh out of episode 3, The Web, we start off really with the Maximal base, but we get to the Maximal base seeing a weather storm. Primal is out in the wilderness. Again, very generic landscape, barren landscape. And you can see that there is some survey posts, tracking posts. We don't entirely know what they are, other than to try and give the Maximals a tactical advantage, but they're being placed out in no man's land to try and give a bit of a heads up, I suppose, to the Maximals for any Predacon activity. But there is a big electrical storm on the go, and Primal does not like the look of it. He's not
at all
happy with the weather interfering with what they're trying to do. He ends up going back to the Maximal base, where you have Rhinox doing some finishing calculations to these other control rods, and then Cheetor tries to lend a hand in his naive way, but even Dinobot steps in at this point, saying this is too important to be left to the hands of a mere child. This needs to be done right. Mm-hmm. But we're also led to believe these control rods are very temperamental and they have a tendency to blow up, which decides to spin out of Cheetor and Dinobot's hand, and they think the entire command center of the Axlong is going to explode before Primal just casually comes up in a lift, juggling it in his hand.
Happens to catch it.
Happens to catch it.
Very jovial too, considering the situation. Going back to the start too, we like you said, we get this pan around this big mountain and we get a funny shot on Primal's nose, like super, super close in. And it goes back to the mountain, and the top of the mountain like collapses or blows up with lightning during the storm, exposing a heap of energon, which is, I think, what disrupts Primal's communication. And we get a little bit of Primal vision with him scanning in and some Cybertronian text scrolling on screen, which is a nice little shot. And as you say, it goes back to the Axelon where Rhinox is finishing up on these, like you say, control rods that telescope into some shiny little hockey pucks. But yes, Dinobot is trying to figure it out. He's looking for some sort of special tool, which again, jargon. And Cheetor's like, I can fix that. And Dinobot's like, no, you won't. And of course, Cheetor, being the child he is, as you said, tries to weld it or whatever he's doing, shoots it across the room. Down the lift it goes, up Primal comes, having a laugh with it, which, yeah, fair enough. Dinobot not too happy.
So this is where you find that this is Optimus, a scientist. He's not being a war leader or a special ops, even though he kind of becomes it as the show goes on. He is still a scientist, born and bred. That's his bread and butter. So he's very much aware that the task they're trying to undertake is not going to work in the current weather conditions. Even Rhino sees that. It's quite interesting to see how scientific minded that Primal is. Again, quite different to an Optimus Prime character. But
well, that's right.
We go on as well to Dinobot being very hot-headed. Still, this is still very early days. We see this throughout the episode. He's tetchy, and even at the start, he's snapping at his colleagues. He's ready to fight, and it's kind of surprises me watching it back how almost trigger happy he is. I know he's the warrior, but he's very itching to fight, and these kind of tasks.
Like in the last episode, he is very aggressive and vengeful and gung-ho at this point. He hasn't turned into that more tactical Dinobot of the later episodes and seasons. And obviously he cracks the shits with Cheetor and he sort of storms off. We get another ridiculous transformation of Dinobot. And it's from the back, so it's even weirder. Like his Dino ass just morphs out of his back and a tail appears. It's
tail comes comical. Out of nowhere. Yeah.
And he wanders off down the hall. Cheetor's pretty butthurt because he wants to go and do it anyway and put all these rods out. And Primal's like, hey, it's not all about you, buddy. We need to do this. Like you say, he's a scientist. He can foresee the issues occurring where these less experienced bots may not, especially with the child in Cheetor. Just wants to be helpful, obviously, but he doesn't understand the full situation of it. And he cracks it and goes off too. And as you say, Dino...
We'll point out that Cheetor goes off butthurt, as you rightly say, because he's itching to go as well. He feels he can outrun an electrical storm, which is very much a hangover to episode 3. It's almost cut and paste in the episode script. It's Cheetor kind of refusing orders, going off and doing his own thing because he thinks he knows best. And that goes back to that line that you touched on, Chris, which was Primal saying, as much as you'd like to think it, Cheetor, this mission isn't about you.
And funny enough that you say that, before we recorded, I made a point of saying that in my mind's eye, episode 3 and 4 kind of molded together, which is why, because Cheetor has that attitude and it's an overarching thing over these first few episodes, it sort of blended into one ep in my head. But obviously they're not. They're separate episodes. But yeah, Cheetor, he thinks he can do everything. Primal's like, we get it. It's great that you want to help, mate, but you can't. Like, this isn't all about you. You need to move on. So Cheetor's off in his room. He's having a bit of a sook, and Dinobot wanders in the room, and Cheetor's like, well, you're going to come and chew me out too. And Dinobot starts his little round of manipulation. Now, there's a funny thing here with the animation, which, again, for the most part is pretty good, but some weird mass shifting going on with Dinobot here. So suddenly he's quite a small raptor, which I don't know what's going on there, but he needed to fit in the room, I guess.
But this is, Dinobot size is I say misleading. It's not. He's large, particularly even walking along in raptor mode. He's very wide, big hips, big legs.
Just not in the scene.
Not in that scene and getting through a door to Cheetor's room, which is very much the college dorm room, isn't it? It's like he's sulking on a bed and he's got posters on his wall.
I'm surprised there's not a pin-up of RC on the wall or something, you know. Like,
Rat Trap's great aunt. Of course, we can't have that, can we? But Dinobot comes in and starts being the devil on the shoulder, the manipulating. He's trying to egg Cheetor on to go out and do this thing anyway, because Dinobot's itching to go. He wants to go out and cause a ruckus, cause a scene, and he knows Cheetor can be the key to that, the antagonist to start it all off. And he even comes out with the line of saying, you know, you are unmatched for your speed in beast mode, and in fact you are the only one who can do this. And you think,
wrapped around that little finger.
See through the charade here, come on.
But Cheetor's a little bit too young and not experienced. He doesn't know that he's being manipulated. He's hot-headed, as we know. He's upset, so he's just going going to listen to what Dinobot's got to say. Dinobot's buttering him up. It's got him wrapped around that little claw. And of course, Dinobot's going to win this because he's quite cerebral, even though he's a bit hot-headed early on. He's very intelligent. There is a cool thing I want to point out with Dinobot, and this, again, carries through the 2 seasons that this version of Dinobot is in. His raptor head animation is very good. It's very emotive. The eyes, that long snout with the lips that move and the teeth, they get a lot of emotion out of Dinobot in a huge range. So it's very fun to watch, and they animate him really well. So when he's scheming and looking at things, like there's an episode later on where there's 2 Dinobots and the interaction between them, both in beast mode, it's fantastic. Really so watch for that when you're watching along with us. But the animation on Dinobot's raptor head is top tier.
Just want to pick up on that because, again, you get the headshot. You see like even the teeth fanning inwards but crossing over one another. Yeah. It just looks very realistic, as much as a 90s CGI can look realistic. But
it's realistic as an unrealistic cartoon is.
It's just got a little bit more, these niceties, these little things just dotted around that just look really good. To that point, we have Cheetor being egged on by Dinobot, and Cheetor then takes it upon himself to take these little hockey pucks off these relays with him,
hockey pucks,
which we're led to believe live inside his beast mode, which is something that's never explored, that they can kind of have internal storage. I know we've seen in the previous episode with Rat Trap with maybe demolitions in his arm. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes they need exterior backpacks and sometimes they don't. But Cheetor takes what he has and he goes running out into the storm. And I know this is before Sentinel, the internal Axelon computer system or defense system, comes online. Mm-hmm. But did no one know of Cheetor leaving the base? Did no one hear the big lift coming down and running off? It's not a subtle way of sneaking it.
I get their comms are piss poor at this point, and again, with the failed experiment in the last episode, they've still got poor comms, and this is kind of what the point of these relay posts and stuff are. But it wasn't meant to happen. Surely ignoring communications out past the base, or whatever it was, 100 meters or whatever arbitrary number they said that they can't communicate past. Surely, like you say, the noise, some sort of activation alarm, scanners that would be on the ship to tell you that Preds were nearby. Like they must have proximity sensors or something. Like he didn't just get, and like, okay, you could make the assumption that Dinobot was manipulating him and went and flicked a switch on the way out. Surely something like, and we don't know the layout of the ship, but it looks like all those lifts are in that front command area.
Command center, exactly.
So how did he get out? Like, did he jump through a porthole? Did he go out the toilet that we're going to see later?
He's just too quick. That's all we know. He's just
hyperspeed straight out the lift.
Cheetor takes it upon himself and he goes running out into the wilderness, goes to these points that he knows he needs to go to get these relays set up in the midst of an electrical storm. And he starts off doing quite well. He gets a first couple down and he's like, great, I'm cooking on gas here, until a lightning bolt happens to strike him. Now, I did find this funny because he then sort of turns up to the sky and says, is that supposed to scare me? Firstly, who's he talking to? Yeah. Secondly, lightning strikes in the same space twice. Come on now. The
odds were higher on prehistoric Earth, all right?
I suppose. And I know these things are going to be effectively conductors. I get it before people go off. It's a bit, is that supposed to scare me?
And plot convenience.
Cue another lightning bolt. yeah, how is it? But he goes along. He starts doing really well. He's all full of himself. It's all going according to plan. He's in beast mode, running along, sees this big chasm in the ground that he thinks, I'm going to jump that. I'm the fastest thing on the planet. And he is, but he's also not a bird. And he decides mid-jump that he's going to plunge over this raw energon pit. We don't see him get out of it as such, but we know he's like precariously hanging. But you can start to see the wheels starting to come off, and then gets to this point of installing the next relay, which starts to crack the ground and things start going a bit awry.
Yeah, he hits an energon vein, essentially. Sort of panic sets in for him. He realizes, okay, I think I'm out of my depth here. I've messed up, but it's kind of too late. And with the lightning storm going on, the lightning hits the relay and through some magical sci-fi trope turns into a transportation device. And we find out later, it's not a spoiler, but that vein is connected all the way through past the Predacon ship, which creates this transportation loop into their system. Bang, Cheetor arrives sitting on Pterosaur's operations desk or whatever you want to call it, to his surprise after thinking no one would be out there.
So this is where it gets a bit it's a bit silly because they can't create communications, but they've accidentally created teleportation. And Pterosaur we see just before this point. Really, most we see of Pterosaur is in this episode up to this point. Doug Parker, who voices him, doesn't come out with too many lines other than a transformation code and sequence. But we see Pterosaur without getting front and center. And he goes to a control panel in the dark side, tries to do a bit of a sweep as to what's going on, realizing the electrical storm is interfering. So they're having as many problems with communications as the Maximals are, which again is a good underlying through the series, particularly the first series. But as you say, and this happens a lot in this episode, sci-fi magic has happened to create.
It's the sci-fi tradition, isn't it? You know,
we've
lightning bolt hits technology, creates some sort of weird MacGuffin device.
Can dematerialize a highly advanced Cybertronian who's turned into an techno-organic mammal that can appear in an exact point where he didn't want to be. Let's roll with it, shall we?
So quite to Pterosaur's dismay and shock, but he quickly decides that he's all for it and terrorizes as it is. And they start their little battle on the hoverboards, the hovering platforms over the lava pit in their base, which is quite fun.
Yeah, we should point out this is because of the very flawed design of the crash ship, that the dark side is flooded with lava, and they never at any point decide to do anything about that.
Let's not put some plates down or a gangway or anything. We'll just leave it open. We've got unreliable technology with all this raw energon storms going on. So we're going to use electric hover platforms that could fail at any time. What could go wrong? Foreshadowing for the end of the season.
But yeah, Cheetor is then chased around, and as you say, Pterosaur terrorizes, and we see Pterosaur very up close at this point. I love Pterosaur's design.
Lovely animation.
I would say after Dinobot, Pterosaur is possibly my favorite Beast Wars character. Always really liked him.
Particularly in an upcoming episode that we'll get to soon.
One of my favorites.
Incredible.
But we see Pterosaur fighting and firing at Cheetor. Cheetor then comes out like, Cheetor, maximize. Oh, wait, I did that already. It's just again showing the naivety of Cheetor.
Look, there's a lot going on for him.
There is. He's all over the place. And they're flying around these platforms. A few quips from Pterosaur. I thought you were the fastest, Kitty. Oh, just you wait till I get in shape. And he turns into beast mode and swats him down. But that kind of puts Pterosaur out the way for a little bit. Well, actually, it transports Pterosaur away.
Yeah, he lands on that control panel.
But we don't see where he goes, although we have an idea where he goes.
Yeah.
And then that cues the arrival of Waspinator and Scorponok, as Waspinator's carrying this scorpion underneath him to be brought to see what all the commotion is about.
Yeah, and at this point, we flick back over to the Axelon where, funny enough, Pterosaur appears on a maximal control panel. And who would be there to find him but his old comrade Dinobot, who is more than happy to see him, of course.
This is a really cool scene.
They realise what's happened. Pterosaur gets all excited and thinks that he can manipulate Dinobot into teaming up and having a truce and ruling the universe, essentially. He gets very hyped up, and the actor, Doug, voice acting there is great. He sort of escalates his voice as he starts saying all these little schemes. It's very good. And Dinobot's like, oh, yes, well, this is good. And they do a big bro fist in the middle of the screen with some sparking. And then at this point, it cuts back to Dinobot's face with this little sort of smirk, like just saying, oh, yeah, we're in on it. And then to us, he's like, yeah, maybe not.
Wink, wink. Yeah, but
very fun scene, though.
There is a sense of, you kind of know Dinobot's not going to play along, because even though this is what he's itching to do, he's itching for a fight, and it gives him an out to do so. Even that big smirk kind of indicates you're going to play him along. Pterosaur never came across as being particularly smart. He had desires to lead and rule and ambitions, but was by no means on a Tarantulas level or anyone else to think things through. So he was easily duped. But I love that, as you say, the escalation of the voice, very Starscream, very scheming. And look, I know that Pterosaur was written to be the Starscream of Beast Wars.
Yeah, he's the wish Starscream.
That scheming side. So we now have a Maximal and a Predacon base and a Predacon and a Maximal base. But of course, apart from Waspinator and Scorponok knowing about Cheetor, none of the other Maximals know that Pterosaur's on board. And again, no Sentinel to sound off saying, there's a Predacon on board. There's a Predacon on board. Wake up, wake up.
Yeah, of course.
And then we go back to the dark side where you see Scorponok and Waspinator shooting at Cheetor through the Predacon base. And they are quite happy to shoot their living hell out of their own ship and firing
no
missiles
care
off.
for consequences in the base. works at all.
Absolutely not, which ultimately leads to this gap in events appearing. Cheetor decides to launch up there and do his best Die Hard impression.
Yeah, up into the ventilation system. Yeah, Cheetor and McLean up in the ventilation system up there, so very good. Then we nick back over to the Axelon as usual. This is very common on this show too, back and forth between, very much like the original G1 series, but without the bumper and the little musical note. And by the way, back to episode 1 of the podcast, let me know if you enjoyed that little interlude there. So we get Dinobot and Pterosaur back on the Axelon there. Yeah, so they're going down the hallway in their beast modes, and Dinobot lures Pterosaur to something that looks suspiciously like a toilet. It might be an airlock, but it kind of looks like a toilet to me.
It's a funny thing to be spherical, isn't it? Or, to have that kind of shape to be an airlock or even a toilet, but he's finding an exit point of the ship, most definitely.
And once Dinobot gets his information, he decides to stuff Pterosaur in the hole. Pterosaur lets out some funny little noises. No, please don't fire me out of this hole, pretty much. And Dinobot hits the button and it fires him out like an aeroplane toilet, like full suction.
Off he goes. I mean, he says this is just capturing the naivety of Pterosaur, isn't it? It's like, don't let me out. We're partners, and Dinobot says right up to this point, I now know what to do. I have no need of you. And you've been duped. You really have.
Yeah, the noise, the sound effect of the flush is fantastic. And then he just fires vertically, sort of on the angle out of the side of the Axelon with the venting, fires him off in, Team Rocket blasting off again. Fantastic.
And you have the puff of smoke with the doof of the land. Very Looney Tunes in its way. But
I absolutely love that scene.
Good enough, and not the last time we'll see such comical humour. So going back to the TV dinner scene where Cheetor is in the ventilation shaft and he's being shot from Waspinator at one side, and then a missile decides to come up, a very well-guided missile from Scorponok that happens to know to break through, spin around, and then start chasing Cheetor from the other direction. Cheetor, who is in his cheetah mode, he then realises he's in a bit of a no-win situation where he decides to kind of run back onto Waspinator's shots, kind of, I guess, skip over Waspinator's intermittent shots, which then leads to one of Waspinator's darts hitting Scorponok's rocket that causes this fairly rubbish-looking explosion.
A bit of a fireball.
A little bit square fireball for it, but it does lead to one of the best transformation sequences, which makes the title credits of transforming with it. And you can imagine that raw guitar going over the intro, but that's the scene it's taken from, and it's captured really well from the angle. But I have got to say, as good as it looks, why did Cheetor think it would be better to run in what would be a cramped area of a ventilation shaft, which clearly isn't big enough to take an upright robot? You surely be quicker on all fours as a cheetah than you would be walking on two legs as a
I think
robot.
it was just an excuse for the very cool transformation sequence, to be honest.
Maybe I'll allow it, but it's a very cool scene, which then causes.
Well, it's iconic, and like you say, it's in the intro of the show. It's very much a core memory of the show, like seeing that in the intro every day when you'd watch it. So very cool. Like, it doesn't make sense at all, but hey, it looked cool at the time.
And that blows, as with the fireball explosion, blows away Waspinator and Scorponok. So we don't see them again, I don't think, for the rest of the episode. So I think that's
not really, no. And back on the Axelon, we've got Primal asking Dinobot about the posts, the extendable hockey pucks, and where Cheetor as a Dinobot sort of plays dumb and attempts to manipulate Primal with a little exposition and sort of great emoting on the raptor face in this scene. You get to see what we know is like a little bit of deception and whatnot going on, but he plays Primal in this particular moment.
Primal's not really taking the story that's been fed to him that Cheetor has met his demise and he's been transported to the other ship. He's not really having it, because this shows a bit of the smarter brain of Primal than, say, Cheetor. But he does kind of listen to the plan from Dinobot of sending detonation charges through this transportation portal to the dark side to do this, as he says earlier in the episode. Megatron would not hesitate to do this to you. We are at war. And this was kind of a rudimentary way of doing this. Primal was very hesitant to do so. And again, he has not given up on Cheetor.
Yeah, and at this point, Cheetor is sort of hacking a console in the Predacon base, at which he finds out through their mapping, which again is kind of a MacGuffin at this point, because previously they've sort of not known where each other is, and later in the season they don't know where each other is, but for some reason on the Pred computer they can see each other's bases and
they know
not
each
that far
other
anyway. But he sees that vein from earlier that we alluded to runs between both bases and beyond, so an explosion at either base will explode both. So he's like, oh crap, what do we do here? So he records this information on essentially a floppy disk.
A floppy disk.
And for those that are a little bit younger, it's the save icon.
Don't play into it. Please don't play into it. Okay,
but it's
a floppy disk. It's how we used to do things in the 90s.
It's a 3 point whatever megabyte floppy disk,
3.5 inch floppy disk, which all the details in the world could be stored on.
I used to save my Diablo 1 files on it.
Didn't you have to install a Windows operating system on like 16 of them? Anyway,
it was ridiculous. Anyway, so he records these details on the floppy disk and decides, well, I can just send this to the Maximal base through the MacGuffin transporter. So he slaps it on, the noise kicks off, and it transports, and at the same time, the Maximals have got the bomb set up, and they're sending it through to the Preds, and guess what happens? Cheetor goes, oh, woohoo, job done, and all of a sudden he's got a bomb in front of him, and he thinks, oh, crap.
So we're led to believe at this point that there's the magical transportation MacGuffin that somehow is defying laws and physics at this point will only work if there's something at the other end to transport, because Pterosaur went with Cheetor effectively. Well, no, Cheetor came first and then
No,
Pterosaur
they came separately, yeah.
They did come separately, but then you were right, the bomb and the floppy disk went at different times. Why wouldn't Cheetor, after the floppy disk went and a bomb appeared, why did he then feel he had to stay? Just put the bomb down and jump onto the panel.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, at the same time, Megatron and Tarantulas appear. Megatron and Pterosaur appear.
It's Pterosaur. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Oh no, they're multiple. Nice. I think the lot of them are there anyway. But Megatron's there, and he's like, "Oh, Kitty, you're in trouble now." And Cheetor goes, "Well, hold on." Voice. Yeah. I'm not going to try it. Sorry, David. Cheetor goes, hold on, don't kill me, essentially. I know how to disarm this bomb. And this is where we'll throw back to our first episode. We made a point of saying Megatron early on was very reactive, and later on in the season he becomes a bit more of a chess player. This is where we start to see that, where Megatron goes, actually, you've got a point here. I'm going to allow this temporary truce because we don't want to get it blown up, and you're useful at this moment. So he allows Cheetor to disconnect the bomb from the panel because it's got little anchors, and he throws it up to Pterosaur. Pterosaur flies off out of the hatch, gets blown up midair, which is quite funny.
But this is Cheetor. His hands are shaking like mad, and like, who put you in charge to be a bomb disposal expert? You got the jitters worse than Scorponok. I will just say quickly on Megatron, probably gets about 3 lines in this episode.
Yeah, very
brief appearance.
Yeah,
very brief.
Yeah,
but you're right. Pterosaur comes in. Yeah, it was a bit. And Pterosaur comes along and flings it away. The only flyer. It's the best thing to do, and not for the first time gets blown up out of the sky.
And nice sound effects as usual. There would have been what's that sound they use in all the Star Wars films?
The Wilhelm scream.
The Wilhelm scream. That would have been a good moment for that. But yes, good sound effects. Megatron then goes, hey, Cheetor, guess what? You're not useful anymore, and decides to fire a missile at him. Oh, yeah, sorry, not a missile. He uses his Tyrannosaurus head and fires his little laser blasts. Cheetor jumps on the panel, which then gets shot by the laser blasts. As Cheetor fires back all the way to the Axelon through the hockey pucks, that blast then disrupts each post and essentially destroys the transportation system.
How convenient that this thing that was never never meant to be and was, for the purpose of the episode, a transportation link between an energon vein, and then it blew up the one panel, and subsequently it's like plotting your escape through a tunnel that you dig and then the tunnel falling behind you. It's very convenient, isn't it?
And conveniently no damage to the maximal base on the other end too.
And Cheetor gets through perfectly unscathed despite going through all these little central points. It's
the explosions were just ever so slightly behind him.
Oh yeah, he's fine. I mean, you have to stretch your mind for this one. It's a good episode. It's a packed episode, but laws of physics doesn't always get obeyed.
No, there's a lot of bullshit in this episode, let's face it. But it's fun nonetheless. Look, Cheetor gets back to the base. Primal says, look, yeah, you saved the day, mate, but ultimately it's kind of your fault. Like, there's some implications here, but let's not do it again. And Cheetor's like, absolutely, until next time, and has a little giggle and runs off. And they all sort of go, ha, 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 Cheetor, you little scamp, and they have a giggle. Yeah. It's a very, job done for the day.
It's a very Toon ending, isn't it? Because even Rhinox laughs and Dinobot goes off in a huff because he didn't get what he wanted. But even Primal kind of, I get it shows a humane side, and I'm all for that. But it's very cut and paste to the previous episode. And I think, isn't it at this point, he says at the end of episode 3, the web, one of his last lines is, from now on, this cat is a team player. And Primal says, well, I'm glad to hear it. And here we are.
All episode,
I was going to say, 1 week later, you're up to your normal stuff again. And he doesn't learn, but I suppose there's a bit more charm to it. For me personally, I think whilst it does have a sense of unbelievableness to it with the relays, and again, they're no further forward with what they're trying to do. There's no communication.
No progress at all.
It's really going more backwards and forwards. This is a good episode. And you see nice little layers going on. You see, like we did with Tarantulas in episode 3, you see the scheming side of Pterosaur this time. And it's good use without relying on the big hitters like Megatron. There is that kind of relying on the undercast to perform.
Very minimal Megatron in this, which doesn't matter because we get a lot of Megatron later on. But we do see the very cool scenes between Pterosaur and Dinobot, which are very classic in the series. Absolutely love their interactions. And again, just the fun development of another character in Pterosaur.
Yeah, definitely. And it shows what the characters' dynamics can bring to the series. When you think of a lovable stupidness of Waspinator, who maybe hasn't gone full stupid yet, maybe that's to come more in season 2. You see, even as well, without Tarantulas, and how that scheming side from the 3rd episode wasn't in here, but its characters bringing what they can to the table. And I think that really shows a lot. One thing I really did like was the energon vein that was running beneath the bases. I thought that was a really nice underlying ploy that whilst it's there and gets sent and doesn't get used again, it's a good way to tie both situations, isn't it? You couldn't just leave a bomb at any point. You couldn't blow up the Axelon, you couldn't blow up the dark side, because chances are it will cause a chain reaction.
It provides somewhat of a safety net to avoid that easy sort of weak plot point going forward. So they can damage each other's bases in battle, which happens quite often where there's attacks. But there's, until later on with Rampage, which we'll cover later on, but this is a very late game, there's no real attempts to destroy each other's bases. There's more tactical moves and stuff. So it's not specifically brought up as, hey, we can't blow the bases up because of this vein. It's knowledge there in that lore. So it just kind of avoids that happening, because it would be a bit of a cop-out, like, hey, let's just blow up the bases each week and we'll thought that plans. But I agree. It's a good device for avoiding unnecessary plot later. Even if that wasn't the intention, that's kind of what it sort of brings.
Yeah, and I think that, as we keep saying, it's growing pains, but it's finding your feet. The writers are finding their feet. With each episode now, there's a bit to carry across. It's like we said in our last podcast, this is a underlying story, no filler episodes to be told, but something to plant the seeds and strings to drag along and to use in future episode, which does happen a lot throughout all of Beast Wars. They have things like the Standing Stones, which we covered in the pilot episodes, which we've not yet revisited, but we will. So there are other things at play here, rather than just, it's all going to be over by the shouting every week, which G1 would do quite a bit. It would all be wrapped up within 20 minutes or so, back to reset. And we had a drawn out story to it. But it is very cut and paste to the 3rd episode, as you said, Chris. It's arguably the same episode, and it could easily be one episode split in half.
Very much so, yeah. And look, the first season it's not a slow start. It's not one of those shows where it's like, it builds into the story. While it's just the core cast and they're trying to build that cast up, they're more standalone antics and episodes that sort of happen soon enough. And we'll obviously see as we do the further episodes, but some more cast members come into the show, which bring in other dynamics. So other abilities, other roles, and more interactions between characters. As that is happening, we'll also get the overarching story of season 1 starting to shed light. So whilst we're getting these sort of standalone episodes now, you'll sort of slowly morph into that endgame story of season 1. And it will sort of happen sooner than you think.
Oh, yeah. It ramps up. Probably with the 5th episode, we start to see a big change, and we'll review that shortly. Going back to this episode for the equal measures, for the here and now, it does have a lightheartedness to it, but it still is quite telling. I mean, that's the first battle we see on the dark side. That's about as much as we see of the dark side to point, really. We don't see a lot of it. And now we get a feel of how they're all flying around. I guess the Axelon, by comparison, looks like a paradise, because whilst it's certainly looking crashed and mangled from the outside, the interior looks perfectly habitable. Cheetor's got his dorm room and things like that, but the dark side is a crumpled mess and it's got lava flowing in, and they're going to have to go around on hovering platforms. It's a bit of you get to see it from the other side. These episodes where no one has a strategic advantage, such as communications or mega cannons or whatever else, they're very much feeding off scraps either side. And in this case, it was floppy disks and bombs and magic teleportations between Pterosaur and Cheetor.
Yeah, which is fun enough. And again, it's not a bad episode. The biggest fault really is that episode 3, The Web, and episode 4, Equal Measures, kind of blend together because they use very similar narratives. Other than that, they're just fine. And again, great moments between characters, some good development, but we're going to start ramping up with the story soon, and it's going to get a lot more fun. So definitely watch out. So again, overall, episode was fine. Nothing to write home about really, but it's enjoyable. You're not going to sit there and be like, oh, yeah, when's this episode going to be over? I might skip to the next episode in the playlist. It's not like that. Trust us.
No, there might be 1 or 2 of those, and we'll get to those in due course. A certain
there are a couple
fused episode.
But
we're going to do it, Chris. We can't skip over them.
So that's a wrap. So that's a wrap on our 4th episode, everyone. So again, thanks for listening. We're loving doing this. Again, we've been getting great feedback from everyone, and we're welcome for suggestions, questions, all of that stuff. So check out our social medias. We're on Facebook now. We have been for a couple of weeks now. So just search That's Just Prime, a Beast Wars podcast. It's the same name everywhere. So ignore whatever the handle is. If you search the full name, it will come up. We are on Podbean as our hosting service, but you can also listen to us on the Podbean app, Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, and all the derivatives of those. We're also on Blue Sky. Again, you search for That's Just Prime, a Beast Wars podcast to come up. On Blue Sky, our handle is That's Just Prime Pod.bluesky.social, whatever the full thing is. I'm Chris Carnage, and here's ArrowFyre on Blue Sky as well. Over on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, Elon Musk's messed up app, I am Chris Carnage _ Ian is ArrowFyre once again, and our podcast is That's Just _Prime. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the same handle, but again, you search the whole word, it will come up. So we're everywhere. I'm also on YouTube, Carnage Creations. Ian is ArrowFyre with a Y.
Always with a Y.
Follow us everywhere if you want. If you don't want to, that's fine. We're really looking forward to pushing on with this series. We have some exciting stuff coming up. We can't say anything yet, but we're going to build up to some things. We're hoping to have a couple of guests pop on potentially this season, but definitely next season. So watch out for that. We're not going to say anything now. And we're going to work on a couple of other episodes soon that aren't specifically episodic reviews. They may be toy reviews or things of that nature. So watch out for that. And again, we're happy for your questions and suggestions.
We've been wanting to do that for a while, as there is a lot of Beast Wars toys out there, particularly with the first season. The amount of variable characters that didn't make it into the show that appeared onto the shelves, we got plenty of stuff to get our teeth into.
Where's my masterpiece Polar Claw? I really like that figure. It was such a little snippet here for you guys now. The mega class toys in the first series of the Beast Wars toys.
So good.
We had Scorponok, and he had his launching Cyber Beast. So half of his claw fired out and turned into a Cyber Beast. Awesome. The Maximals had Polar Claw, which is this big ass polar bear that had a bat come out of his front leg and claw. Such an awesome toy. Very action figure-esque. Cool.
Like, don't want to give away the good stuff, Chris. Let's save
but
it.
Where's my masterpiece, Polar Claw? I'll take a legacy one at this point.
Yeah.
Anyway, everyone, thank you so much for listening. I'm Chris. That's Ian. We're really having fun with this. So thanks again, and we will see you on the next one.
Bye.
Well, that's just prime.